Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Minerva Inwald. I'm Judith Nielsen Postdoctoral Fellow in Contemporary Art at UNSW Sydney, and I'm also the Seminars Officer for the Australian Society for Asian Humanities. Before we get started today, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm on today, the Wongal people, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. So welcome to this talk today that's part of the series Talks in Chinese Humanities, which is co-presented by the China Studies Centre and the Department of Chinese Studies at the University of Sydney, as well as the Australian Society for Asian Humanities and the Faculty of Art, Design and Architecture at UNSW Sydney. I'm very happy to hand over to our host for today, Sophia Huiling Chen, who's a third-year PhD candidate in Chinese Studies at the University of Sydney. Her thesis examines the theme of transnational mobility and the technique of genre subversion in contemporary queer fiction from Taiwan. So Sophia is going to introduce our speaker today and then manage the Q&A at the end of the talk. So I'll hand over to you now, Sophia.
Hi, everyone. So we are very honored to invite Professor Jiarong Wu today. Professor Jiarong Wu, he is an associate professor in the Department of Global Cultural and Language Studies at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. And Dr. Wu received his PhD in comparative literature from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign at United States. And he specializes in Sinophone literature and film through the lens of post-colonial theories, Indigenous studies, diaspora, and eco-criticism. And today his topic is titled Through an Indigenous Lens, Syaman Rapongan's Rewriting of Oceanic Taiwan. So the floor is yours, Dr. Wu.
Well, thank you, Sophia, and thank you, everyone, for inviting me to participate in your lecture series. Definitely an honor for me to be here today. As just told the participants that I just can't wait to have a strong finish in semester one and move on to the next chapter of the year. But of course, I need to get it done before I can start enjoying my weekend. As you know, my talk will be focusing on Syaman Rapongan as an indigenous writer from Oki Island, Taiwan. So I want to begin with the quotation from President of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen, at the inauguration ceremony of the Ocean Affairs Council, OAC, in 2018. President Tsai Ing-wen emphasized in her welcome speech, quote, "Taiwan is an oceanic country. The ocean is coded in the DNA of Taiwanese people," end quote. In recent years, Taiwan has gradually developed its unique national identity through its reconstruction of indigeneity and re-examination of its maritime history. Taiwan's cultural position is further complicated by the colonial practices of the Dutch and the Spanish in the early 17th century and the short-lived command by Layman Admiral Koxinga in the second half of the 17th century, followed by the Qing court's imperial reign from 1683 to 1895, Japan's colonial rule from 1895 to 1945, and the KMT's authoritarian regime in the post-war era. It is significant to observe how the political focus of contemporary Taiwan is shifting from the continental heritage of China and Chinese diaspora as experienced by earlier Chinese immigrant settlers to a far-reaching global indigenous network across the Pacific Ocean, thus creating a unique oceanic discourse of its own and fostering an imagined community as defined by Benedict Anderson in the profound process of localization and nation building. In short, the DPP government is promoting the oceanic identity of the island state, which is separated from the continental China-centric ideology across the Taiwan Strait. DPP's or Tsai Ing-wen's view of Oceanic Taiwan is probably not identical to Syaman Rapongan's view. It is something I want to highlight in today's presentation. So in today's presentation, I will examine the oceanic discourse in Taiwan literature with a focus on Syaman Rapongan, whose seafaring writing goes beyond the political arena and the long-established cross-Strait dynamic, and is well-grounded in Taiwan's indigenous literature. My talk is divided into two parts. The first part takes into account the overlapping of Taiwan's indigenous literature and marine literature with a survey of Syaman Rapongan's literary journey as an indigenous writer, his cultural resistance against the island state, and his love of the ocean. The second part provides a critical analysis of Syaman Rapongan's floating dreams in the ocean, 大海浮梦, and Matanu Wawa, 大海之眼. Rapongan provides a disconstructive critique of the Han Chinese dominated ideology in Taiwan and employs the Pacific Ocean as an example, expansive example and all-encompassing entity across geographical, racial, ethnic, and national boundaries. Rapongan's writing strategy sheds light on the heated discussions of the reproduction of Taiwan's indigeneity in response to the oceanic discourse of Taiwan. Through an indigenous lens, Rapongan's works help to reshape Taiwan literature and connect Taiwan with the global tribal communities through ocean passages. Taiwan has 16 officially recognized indigenous peoples, including Amis or Bangcha, Ataya, Bunong, Rahaluwa, Kavanan, Karakanavu, Paiwan, Puyuma, Rukai, Saisiat, Sazizaya, Sidek, Tao, Sao, Taruku, and Zhou. All of these tribal communities belong to the enlarged Austronesian-speaking world. About 5,000 years ago, some of Taiwan's indigenous people undertook southbound voyages and were later intermingled and intermarried with the other Pacific islanders. Since 2016, Taiwan's reconstruction of its collective indigenous identity is ideologically amplified by President Tsai Ing-wen, whose paternal grandmother is from the Paiwan tribe. While the Taiwanese ruling party is setting a lofty political goal to mobilize anti-China nationalist sentiment through its indigenous subjectivity, indigenous peoples' history and culture are ironically in crisis in Taiwan due to the rapid urbanization and modernization on the island. Like other tribal communities around the world, Taiwan's indigenous peoples are faced with cultural assimilation from within and from the dominant West. Although the stigmatization of indigenous Taiwanese peoples is no longer a common practice as observed under Japan's and KMT's rules, the indigenous communities in Taiwan continue to be plagued by a series of social political discrimination, despite the rise of the indigenous awareness on the island. Since the 1980s, indigenous activists started a series of protests to fight for the preservation of their tribal cultures and rights to the land. There's one important department formed in 1984, and the name is Alliance for Taiwanese Aborigines. A number of indigenous writers are also involved in these political campaigns through active participation and literary creation. Syaman Rapongan is undoubtedly one of the most notable indigenous activists and writers for his contribution to Taiwan's marine literature in the new era. Taiwan's marine literature has a delayed start. In the past 400 years, written accounts about Taiwan and the seas around it were mainly produced by the Big Other, such as Qing officials, Han Chinese settlers, and Japanese colonizers. And and these people actually provided very limited space and agency to indigenous people in Taiwan. In the 20th century, Taiwan literature gradually gained the widespread recognition and political weight through native soil movements, which promoted the writings on Taiwanese history, place, and people. Still, marine literature remained a relatively vague term in post-war Taiwan. As Wu Mingming observes, ocean was never the focus of attention and merely served as spatial scene and imagery in Taiwan literature from 1950s to 1980s. Since the 1980s, marine literature has become a notable subcategory of Taiwan literature in relation to nature writing and eco-criticism. Broadly defined, marine literature points to the literary works relating to the ocean or any activities in the ocean, and it covers a vast range of genres: poetry, prose, novel, theater, literary diary, and literary biography. To be more specific, marine literature is centered around the ocean and contains various natural scenes of the sea, sea creatures, and the interaction between humans and the ocean. Oceanic writing can be extended to the depiction of sailors, fishermen, and navy in response to the unique consciousness and spiritual values of the ocean. It is not until the 1990s when Syaman Rapongan and Liao Hongji, a non-indigenous writer, began to bring the localist oceanic writings to the attention of journal readers and critics. Born in 1957, Syaman Rapongan, whose Chinese name is Shinu Lai, is of Dao/Yami Aboriginal descent in Orchid Island, or Lanyu in Chinese. He left his hometown for high school education on the main island of Taiwan in 1973. Upon graduation, he declined the special benefit granted by the Taiwanese government for indigenous students like him to be admitted to colleges without taking the college entrance examination. Instead, Syaman Rapongan started working part-time and studying for examination himself. It took him several years to pass the exam and enter Tamkam or Danjiang University, and finally earned his bachelor's degree in French in 1986. After enduring hardship and discrimination, Syaman Rapongan decided to return to Orchid Island in search of his cultural roots as a Tao man and an indigenous writer in 1989. Compared with his fellow indigenous writers, Syaman Rapongan stands tall in the literary arena of Taiwan for his writing about the Pacific Ocean and Orchid Island, which is a small island close to the southeastern coast of Taiwan. For thousands of years, Orchid Island is home to the Tao people, who are the only indigenous people not living on the main island of Taiwan. The Tao people actually share more similarities and interacted more frequently with the Ivatan Indigenes on the Baton Islands of the Philippines, while continental Han Chinese or Han Taiwanese knowledge was not to be introduced to them until Qing Dynasty. Compared with other indigenous peoples in Taiwan, Tao people in Orchid Island stand out for their devotion to ocean-centered lifestyle and belief, while other indigenous writers focus on land or mountain-based narratives. Rapongan adds diversity to Taiwan's indigenous literature with his unparalleled oceanic writing. The Syaman Rapongan skillfully incorporates his real-life experience as a Tao fisherman into his oceanic writing. He has attracted a large readership and received very positive reviews far and wide. He has earned numerous recognitions, including Wu Sanlian Award, Taiwan Literature Golden Award, and Wu Zhuoliu Literary Prize. Lambo is emotionally attached to the traditional Dao way of living, both on paper and in real life. Apart from the dominant indigenous hunters' tales from the main island, Syaman Rapongan instills in his writing the essential practices of the Dao people, including plank boat building, spear fishing, and navigation. To Lambo, ocean can be feared, but it is also closer than his family by blood and serves as an integral part of all his literary works. In addition to floating dreams in the ocean and the Matanu Wawa, Lampoan's representative works include 巴莱湾的神话、人海情深、黑色的翅膀、海浪的记忆、老海人、航海家的脸、天空的眼睛、and 安诺米恩之死。As disclosed in his autobiographical collection, 人海情深, Cold Sea Deep Emotions, Lambo straddles between his Tao background and the Han-dominated education he received. Lambo's relocation from Taipei back to Orkney Island corresponds with the ongoing indigenous movement that celebrates the return to one's native soil and cultural tradition. What is worth noting here is that Lambo, while culturally semi-syncretized, endures a difficult process of readaptation into the Dao community. He has to relearn the tribal language and adjust his cultural position in order to reclaim his long-lost identity as a Tao fisherman. How to revive Tao traditions becomes the top priority in Lambo's daily practice and critical thinking. Therefore, Lambo's rewriting of Oceanic Taiwan is not unlike a symbolic journey of the self-redemption in connection with the greater oceanic community. With a detail-oriented account, Lambo showcases diverse aspects of Tao people, including oral storytelling, religious rituals, and fishing and navigation knowledge. The highlight of Lambo's writing is the vivid depiction of the Flying Fish Festival, which is the most important ceremony for Tao people. This traditional ceremony combines Tao people's fishing practice and cultural ritual, and further points to the profound relationship between humanity and the natural environment on an ecological level. To better promote ecological consciousness, Lampoan's story also leads readers to ponder over the foreseeable environmental disasters caused by the storage of nuclear waste in Orkney Island. The impending danger of radiation leaks has become a shared nightmare of the Tao people. Lampoan's ecological concerns overlapped with his critical observation of the struggle endured by his fellow tribespeople. In this case, Lampoan's promotion of sustainable natural environments is reinforced by his fight for the exclusive cultural and the social political spaces for the Tao people. In a nutshell, Cold Sea Deep Emotions, 人海情深, can be regarded as a good entry into the understanding of Lampoan's works because it captures how the author embarks on a prolonged quest for indigeneity and offers a nuanced take on the illuminating dynamic between humanity and nature in the Pacific Ocean. In the following section, I would like to bring into focus two recent works by Lampoan in order to examine his attempt to channel unease and anxiety of indigenous subjects in face of dire post-colonial situations, and to embrace the sparkling narratives of the Tao spirit in Orchid Island and in the open sea. Floating Dreams in the Ocean is an autobiographical novel for family history, personal experience, and cross-cultural encounters. This novel contains 4 chapters: The Hungry Childhood, Exile in the South Pacific Ocean, Navigating Through the Maluka Strait, and In Search of the Codes of the Sea. Readers can see in Lambo the determination required for an indigenous writer to voice out for himself and for his tribal community. Lambo opens the novel with his strong interest in the South Pacific Islands and Oceania as a whole. His dream is to travel from island to island and mix and mingle with various island peoples. As Lambo makes clear in the book, quote, if ocean is a nation, it is absolutely the republic where I seek shelter, end quote. While desiring for a pan-oceanic identity, Lambo does not intend to undermine the individuality of each tribal community. Tao is no exception. Tao or Tao means people. Although it is a Chinese language novel, Lambo relies on the romanization of certain Tao terms and expressions to preserve his tribal language. The original name of Orchid Island is Ponso no Tau, which means the island of the Tao people. The author's emphasis on the original tribal name points to his strong belief in returning to the traditions as indigenous peoples in Taiwan are forced into a Han Chinese center setting and struggle in a repressive political and economic system. Starting in the 2nd chapter of Floating Dreams in the Ocean, Syaman Rapongan fulfills his ambition to recreate an overarching oceanic framework. In the novel, the author not only criticizes the nuclear waste storage in Orchid Island, but also lashes out against the nuclear weapon tests in the Pacific by Western countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. Lambo's TransPacific Concern speaks to his close engagement with the cultural, linguistic, and genetic interconnectedness of Austronesian peoples across the Pacific. Interestingly, Lambo does not limit his oceanic narrative to the Austronesian family. To expand his oceanic scope, he includes a section about his encounter with young fishermen who are Qiang people, one of the ethnic minority groups in China. Qiang people are mainly living in the remote mountainous region of Sichuan near the Tibetan plateau. But these Qiang characters in the novel joined the distant waters fishing crew in order to make a living and save up for the next stage of their life. Despite the different ethnicities, purposes, and fishing methods in the sea, Lambo identifies these Qiang fishermen as wave chasers who catch fish and share the same marine space with him in the Pacific. It profoundly creates a minority-to-minority dialogue across borders in opposition to the one singular indigenous voice and to the political clash between China and Taiwan. Lambo's border crossing vision is further enriched in the 3rd and 4th chapters of the novel. For example, in chapter 3, it revolves around Lambo's sea voyage on Sendak Explorer, a replica of ancient Indonesian boat from May to July in 2005. Together with the Japanese adventurers Yamamoto Yoshiyuki and 5 Indonesian sailors, Lambo started his journey from Indonesia, but did not reach Los Angeles as planned by Yamamoto. After a phone call with his 2 daughters, Yamamoto decided to end his exploration early and return to his family in Japan. Yamamoto's return to Japan is echoed by Lampoan's homecoming towards the end of the chapter. Despite their shared love for sea exploration, Lampoan and Yamamoto have to return home, respectively, which is indicative of family dynamic as one's final destinations. On a higher level, the author's identity is complete with his return to family and Tao traditions, because his literary practice heavily relies on his unflagging love for his people, island, and the vast ocean. The novel ends with a brief account about the founding of the Island Indigenous Science Studio, or 岛屿民族科学工作坊 in Chinese, which aims to fight for the preservation and promotion of the indigenous island culture. At the close of the novel, Lamboan expresses his primitive hunger as a concluding remark, and in this way reinstates his political agenda about tribal integrity and ideological resistance against the oppressive state power. 4 years after the success of Floating Dreams in the Ocean, Lamboan's 2018 novel Mata Nu Wawa, which literally means Eyes of the Ocean, was published in Taiwan to critical acclaim. In this work, Lamboan takes his readers on a richly imagined journey of navigating his lost years on the main island of Taiwan and his resolution to keep alive Tao traditions in Orchid Island. The author takes a further step to draw the fine line between the nation state and the indigenous tribes while rethinking his cultural relationship with the Pacific. The novel draws on one special incident regarding the traditional ritual of honoring Tao or Yami ancestral spirits and how it was harshly disrupted by outsiders, the local chief of Han Chinese police and the Caucasian Catholic priest. As the witness on the scene, Lamboan was inspired by his grand-uncle's heated conflict with the political colonizer and the religious colonizer. And eventually, Lamboan is geared towards the mission to further promote the indigenous consciousness in Orchid Island, and little by little, the new generations will be able to accept their cultural roots through the endeavors. As an oceanic writer, Syaman Rapongan criticizes colonization and promotes animism, which embraces a distinctive spiritual essence of all things, both the living and the inanimate. From Lamboan's perspective, there should be no hierarchy among worldviews and religions. As mentioned in the novel, the author came to a great realization that Chinese language literature is land-based and is not unlike the literature that divides or urban literature, while his island literature is oceanic and discriminated literature. That is his unique translated literature of the ocean and islands. Lamboan's practice of translation can be analyzed from two angles. On one level, Lamboan uses the Chinese language as the medium to deliver his thoughts drawn from the tribal language of the Dao people. On another, Lamboan elevates his translation by using ethnographic descriptions to emphasize local knowledge and expressions specific to the Tao tribe. In the light of cultural translation, this edifying novel concludes with the author's comparison of two world maps. At the age of 10, Lamboan spotted the first world map at the local school in Orchid Island. To his dismay, the Pacific Ocean on the map is divided in two and loses its entirety. 30 years later, Lamboan was thrilled to discover the Pacific Ocean-centered world map in Rarotonga, which is the largest island in the Cook Islands. The Pacific-centered world map is now hung up on the wall of Lamboan's residence in Orchid Island. Being local and boundary crossing simultaneously, the author declares his passion for the vast ocean and always seeks to facilitate the links among islands and islanders in the novel. Both Floating Dreams in the Ocean and Matanu Wawa explore themes of indigenous consciousness, cultural resistance against colonial subjugation, and sustainable connection with nature. These essential topics are welcome to the overarching framework of Taiwan literature, which celebrates the emergence of ethnic and cultural diversity. Over the past few decades, indigenous writings have become a crucial part of the heritage of Taiwan literature. Separated from the pursuit of modernity, indigenous writers focus more on the issue of how to better represent their real life experience and envision their tribal traditions. The above findings help us re-examine Lamboan's writing on the Tao community and his social, political, and eco-critical agendas. Undoubtedly, Lamboan showcases a special way to embody the peculiar character of Orchid Island and the Pacific, thus enriching the distinguished collection of Taiwan literature in the 21st century. However, as indigenous literature is incorporated by the Big Other, it is also appropriated as the metaphor of Taiwanese-ness, as argued by Xingya Huang Xingya. The cultural appropriation performed by the nation state is disapproved by Lamboan. Although Orchid Island is part of the Taiwanese territory, it is identified as a free-floating Tao community linked with a wider world under Lamboan's design. Lamboan's oceanic writing is based on the traditional belief of the Tao people in the mental map drawn by the respected elderly of the Tao community in 1929. Orchid Island is part of the circle that includes the small island and the islands of Batanes in the Philippines, while the main island of Taiwan is excluded. When we look at the map of Taiwan, Orchid Island is close to the southeast coast of the main island, and Orchid Island is so small, almost invisible in the map of Taiwan. But if we cover the Pacific Ocean in the discussion, as Tao people did about 100 years ago, Orchid Island can be included in a much larger network of Oceania, while Taiwan and its continental legacy can be marginalized, if not left out. It is a fairly intriguing approach to confronting the Taiwan-focused, Taiwan-centered narrative. So of course, my research is closely connected with recent scholarship on Syaman Rapongan. I definitely benefit a lot from scholars like Dong Shuming, Huang Xingya, and Chen Zhifan, and Qiu Guifen. Overall, it is a bold move for Lamboan to confront the dominant native soil or nativist writing strategy of Taiwan literature developed from the 20th century onward, while a great number of nativist writers are trying to imagine and construct a collective Taiwanese subjectivity across ethnicities. Lamboan's works do not endorse a pan-Taiwanese identity, but instead reflect the particular time and space experienced by Tao people and expand the horizons of his indigenous writing through a nuanced narrative about the Pacific Ocean. So it is clear that the Lamboan is seeking to revive the traditional belief and ritual of the Tao community, ditching the main island for the expansive Pacific Ocean. Lamboan's writing represents a non-cooperative narrative within the literary arena of Taiwan and beyond. As Lamboan ventures into the Pacific Center discourse, he does not identify himself as a Taiwanese writer, but as a writer of world islands and the writer of oceanic ethnicity. Lambo's writing is endowed with an intrinsic interplay of islands and the ocean. In the meantime, Lambo's political agenda reminds readers of the "We Are the Ocean" theory presented by aptly Haofa, an influential Tongan and Fijian writer and anthropologist. According to Haofa, quote, there is a world of difference between viewing the Pacific as islands in the far sea and as a sea of islands. The first emphasis is dry surfaces in a vast ocean far from the centers of power. Focusing in a way stresses the smallest and remotest of the islands. The second is a more holistic perspective in which things are seen in the totality of their relationship, end quote. One may use Haofa's theory to grasp the core of Lambo's oceanic writing, in which the Tao community is encompassed by the Pacific Ocean in its entirety. Lambo's literary works trace journeys across the Pacific Ocean and reinforce connectedness to an extensive seafaring culture. His ocean-focused strategies extends the scope of Taiwan literature and creates a fascinating blend of indigenous voices and tales of islands. So it is a refreshing take to strengthen Taiwan's cultural tie with the Pacific and even global indigenous communities. In other words, Lambo leads readers to reassess Orchid Island's relevance to the main island of Taiwan and to the oceanic world by rejecting hierarchies among ethnicities and races, and by challenging boundaries of nations and cultures. Through his oceanic writing about Tao people and Orchid Island, Lambo not only achieves greatness by confronting colonial mindsets, but also stimulates the literary production of worlding Orchid Island and Taiwan in the 21st century. When it comes to Taiwan as a contested island state from north to south, from indigenous to Han settlers, the reconstruction of its collective cultural identity in opposition to the continental discourse of China is a topic impossible to miss. Orchid Island might be a small island of merely thousands of Tao people and has long been exploited and marginalized by the Taiwanese government and the Han Chinese settlers. Yet Orchid Island functions as a sea portal for justifying Taiwan as an oceanic island state separated from mainland China, although it may not be Lambo's original intention in this case. Given its cross-cultural and political significance, Lambo's rewriting of Oceanic Taiwan is a narrative that never wears out. Thank you.